Today I wanted to talk about how we speak about Israel. Just a month ago, in a very chaotic world, and lots of other terrible stories, unfortunately, making the headlines, I hope you all noticed that Israel celebrated its 74th anniversary, which among other things means we're 1 year away from the 75th anniversary, and actually Israel is in its 75th year. It's an enormously important milestone, and actually next Yom HaAtzmaut, I hope some of you might consider joining us. We're going to be going to Israel, the whole Toronto Jewish community, on a UJA-sponsored mega mission to celebrate the 75th anniversary. 75 is also an important year because in Jewish history, there's a very important character who completely changes his life at 75 years old. Anybody know who I'm talking about? Abraham. Who got it? All right, 10 points. Yes. At 75 years old, the Torah says, Abraham heard the call, Lech lecha me'artzecha. You leave the land where you were born, leave your father's house, and go forth to the land that I will show you, the land of Canaan. The Midrash explains that it wasn't just a call from heaven that motivated Abraham to go, but there was an inner drive. Abraham re-examined his life and his beliefs, and that's what causes him to embark on his journey. In Canadian culture, 75 means you're old. Time to draw out your retirement plan, your pension. But not so in the Torah. In our tradition, 75 is an opportunity for reflection. It can be the end of one stage of life and the beginning of a whole new stage of life. It is both young and old in the best senses of those words, and that's what I think is true about Israel. It is a country that is both young and old. How is it old? Think of this. When Israel joined the United Nations, it was the 59th country on the list. Today there are 193 countries in the UN, which means that 2/3 of the countries in the world are actually younger than Israel. Israel is old because it's 75 years. It is still true to its core mission. It is the only Jewish state. It remains the national homeland of the Jewish people. And whether for good or for bad, it is still the place that is on the minds and the hearts of Jews all over the world. But how is it young? Well, just like Abraham, Israel has not allowed the passing of time to cause it to stop questioning and exploring and reinventing and challenging its assumptions. How many times have I heard from some of you who weren't in Israel maybe for just 5 years, and you come back and say, I don't even recognize the country that I just came back from. It reinvented itself. It is a country not afraid to reimagine, not afraid even to reach out to old enemies, as we've seen recently, and make new friends. It's at milestones like these where it helps to remember and consider what the state of Israel was meant to be in the first place, and what did it seek to accomplish. These are really important questions to address, even though they may be obvious to many of you, because they are questions that don't apply logically to most countries in the world. What is its purpose? What did it seek to accomplish? Why doesn't it apply logically to most countries in the world? Well, if you think about Belgium or Switzerland or the Netherlands or Italy or even of Canada, most countries in the world were not created with a particular purpose in mind. They were created because there were a group of people living there that already shared a common culture, and nation-states evolved from those places, gradually from the culture that was already there, or maybe like in Canada, a couple of different cultures that were already there. The United States may be an exception to this, by the way. That was a country founded with a purpose. It was a country that says, we don't care what color you are, what gender you are, what religion you are, where you're from, as long as you want to participate in this democratic experiment. Now, you and I can have a debate about whether the United States has actually fulfilled its purpose. But there's no question that America was founded on much, much more than a common culture. There was an ideal. Give us your tired, give us your hungry, give us your poor. Just like Israel, it had a purpose. It had ideals. What is Israel's purpose? What was its purpose? Israel's purpose was felt and articulated by the great Zionist thinkers who lived in Europe at the turn of the 20th century. Jews were living in Europe for a very long time. Life had ups and life had downs. But the early Zionists had a sense that life in Europe was becoming increasingly untenable for the Jews. They did not know at the time how right they would be. It was just a sense that this wasn't a place that would allow Jews to live and flourish. Some Jews did not agree. Today, the vast majority of Jews support the idea of a state of Israel, but at the turn of the 20th century, there were those who were rabidly opposed to the Zionist plan. Some were very invested in European Enlightenment ideals and preferred that Jews just try and assimilate as best they can. Some wanted to create Jewish independent states within Europe. There were huge debates about what to do with the Jüdische Frage, the Jewish question, which was an active question in Europe at that time. But Zionism said, the answer is, we've got to get out. We need to leave, and we need to create something of our own, build a country of our own. Zionism, by the way, was not just motivated by a sense that Jewish life in Europe would be physically untenable. The early Zionists felt that it would be spiritually untenable for Jewish life to continue in Europe. Why? Because there we were living on thin ice. We're always looking over our shoulder, worried. How are the other people perceiving us? How is the government going to perceive us? How is the general population thinking of us? Always looking over our shoulder. Zionists believed that normal people don't live that way. Leon Pinsker, who was one of the great Zionist thinkers, he articulated this in a book of his called Auto-Emancipation. If you care about Zionism and are interested in its history, Auto-Emancipation is a prize to read. He said in his book, the Jewish people are sick. They're sick. Always looking over their shoulder, never thinking for themselves, worried always that they're going to annoy somebody if they're too loud or too different. It's a people that doesn't even speak its own language anymore. What kind of people is this? This people repeats all day long, let us return to its homeland. In the blessing after meals, Boneh berachamav Yerushalayim, amen. God, speedily rebuild Jerusalem. At Shabbat morning services, Matai timloch b'Tzion, when shall we return to rule in Zion? When we pray, where are we facing? We're facing Israel. When we conclude our Seders, L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim, let us be next year in Jerusalem. Pinsker and others said, why are you talking so much? Why are we talking so much and doing nothing? Another major idea that motivated the early Zionists, for most of them, but not for all, Zionism was a revolution against Judaism. As painful as it might be in a synagogue to admit that, many early Zionist thinkers were angry at a religion that taught that you had to wait for God to give you the signal that it would now be okay to return to Israel. That is explicit in the Talmud, whether you like it or not. We have to wait, and only God will say when it is time to return. Well, what did the Zionists say? We're not waiting anymore. We're not going to wait for God anymore. We're taking command of our destiny with our own hands. And so if you go in my office, you'll see a big certificate with the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel and 2 images on either side of the Declaration of Independence. Images of what heroism looked like to early Zionists. What did heroism look like to them? It was a soldier holding a gun, and it was a farmer planting his field. Images of people taking their destiny in their own hands. And Zionism wanted to rebel against the notion that the Jewish people were not a real people, that they were some race of some sort. Real peoples have countries and borders. Real people have languages. Real people have school systems. Real people have a whole array of things that make themselves real. And they said, that's what we're going to build in this new homeland. Real peoplehood. These are the 4 main, you could argue with me, but I think they're the 4 main purposes of the Zionist movement. Those that I just articulated. So let's look at how Israel's doing. Does anyone in Israel worry about anti-Semitism? Well, they worry about anti-Semitism in the rest of the world, but they don't worry about anti-Semitism in Israel. Do Israelis believe they're in control of their destiny? You bet they do. And they assert it and acknowledge it all the time. Are Jews a real people? Well, walk into Steinmatsky bookstore or another bookstore in Israel. See the books. See what's happened to the dead, once dead Hebrew language. And you tell me if we're a real people or not. How much pride we ought to feel to see all the major works of world literature translated into Hebrew, because like every other people in the world, we're real too. Has Israel been able to cultivate a sense of national identity to Jews who are secular, Jews who are not religious? Well, they've done a much better job at doing that than we have here in the diaspora. Israelis worry about many, many things, but they don't worry about being Jewish. Let me repeat that. They worry about many things, but they don't worry about being Jewish. In Israel, we stand proud. In Israel, we are free. In Israel, we are independent. If we just remember why this country was created, if we just remind ourselves about where our people was 76 years ago. We have to acknowledge that Israel has been an unmitigated success. You see, often our conversations about Israel focus on one thing and one thing only. You know what that is: the conflicts. We focus on the challenges. We focus on the many other ills that Israeli society has. It's the time we're living in now. We're all critical of everything. No matter what institution we're talking about, the first thing we see is everything that's wrong with it, and we jump to criticize. And so we criticize Israel too. It's the first thing we see, everything that's wrong. It's what we do to Belgium and Canada and the Netherlands and Italy, so why not do it to Israel? When these issues dominate the conversation, Zionism loses even before we begin. This 75th year is a chance to change the rhetoric, not to obsess over everything that's wrong, but to remember what life was like before there was an Israel. Let's start from there. That's why, even though I believe to most of you, most of what I'm saying today is stuff you already know, it's rather obvious, it's worth repeating, don't you agree? It's vital for us to remember why the Jewish people decided to take on this project in the first place. And let's acknowledge that it has been wildly successful in achieving all those goals that we set out to accomplish. Today we read the priestly blessing. And actually within the blessing there's a reminder to the people. This blessing was recited at the temple every year when people gathered. There's a reminder in this blessing to everybody that was receiving it that your story begins long before you were born. The Torah portion said, Ko tevarchu et bnei Yisrael. Ko means this way, that way. So shall you bless the people. It's a word that all the commentators say is superfluous. Why is it there? Listen to this. The Midrash answers the question. Why does it say Ko? Because a long time before there was a high priest, God said to Abraham, look up at the sky. Do you see the stars in the sky? Ko yihiyeh zarecha. These shall be your descendants. Every time the blessing is recited, we are reminded that where we are today doesn't matter if we can't remember where we came from. No matter what problems are going on in your life, no matter what you want to criticize, no matter how much you need those blessings, remember you are already the fulfillment of God's prophecy to Abraham. Each one of us, we are already the stars in the sky that Abraham saw when God made a covenant with him. And so today, if we're going to merit the blessings in the future for our country, we have to remember how that country is the realization of the dreams of those who came before us. Israel's security issues are very complex and very challenging. I don't want to minimize them. But our obsession with these issues sometimes leaves aside the question of what we are trying to build there in the first place, what we are doing there, why we decided to come home. In that old country, our people came home. And in this new country, we reimagined ourselves in the most prolific, dynamic, multicultural, multicolored, and vibrant way. I don't know about you, but I don't have any idea what Israel will look like at 100. I don't even know what it will look like 5 years from now. No idea whatsoever. But after 75 years, it is indeed the place where in literature, in culture, in television, in music, in politics, in the military, in a whole array of ways, the Jewish people, as individuals and as a nation, are deciding what it means to be a Jew. And they are deciding it for themselves. That is the core foundation of the state of Israel. That is what we're doing there. Shabbat Shalom.